Hello, everyone. I'm Dian Griesel. I'm also known as Silver Disobedience, and this is the Silver Disobedience Perception Dynamics podcast. And I am sitting in iconic Manhattan Center, which is my collaboration partner on some of these podcasts, and it is a lot of fun to be here because there's a lot of history. And speaking of history, today our guest is John Strausbaugh. He is considered the historian, the biographer, truly the biographer of New York. And one of the things we were talking about that we're going to get right into is how New York evolves yet stays the same. And we'll talk about all those differences that we experience in every day in the history of New York. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
How did New York become this passion play for you?
It's such a fascinating place. If you want to be writing history, which I do, you could write a million books about New York City and die and come back and write a million more. The history is so deep, so layered, so messy, so fractal. There's a lot of so there's weird connections between this person and that person, and somebody in the 18th century and somebody in the 21st century, and I'm not very interested in like institutional history or organizational history or the history of buildings. I'm interested in people. People are history. So New York has either birthed or attracted so very, very many fascinating, interesting movers and shakers in all ways, forever, since the 17th century. So why not become its biographer?
And you do such a good job about that. And a theme, you have Victory City and, focusing on New York during World War II. You wrote about the village, Greenwich Village, and, it's starts to more current time and who it's attracted and what's going on. You have a book about the Lower East Side and the characters on the Lower East Side. The big thing that I found is reading your books, you realize humanity doesn't change that much. So what do you observe?
No, that is true. People are people. People have always been people. Things change. We have developed technologically over the millennia, but I'm not sure we're very different from when we were, in a cave squatting over a little fire in the dark. I think humanity is, if we change at all, we change very, very slowly over tremendous amounts of time. So I think one of the bad cliches about history is that, it's about people who dressed funny and walked funny and were different from who we are and how we are. No, they weren't. If you know anything about New Yorkers in the 19th century, they were the same bustling, loud, crazy people that they were in the 20th century and that I guess we still are in the 21st. And I think that's true anywhere. People are people. And again, I don't consider myself an historian. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a professor. I'm an historiographer. I write about history for everybody else to read, not just for scholars to read. I think that in that case, the most interesting kinds of history to be writing about are the people history, the characters, the figures, not always the famous ones. I always am trying to ferret out people that aren't very well known but are fascinating. The book I wrote on the Lower East Side, there's no famous people in that book, but they're all fascinating people and very accomplished, each in his or her own way. So I love people as a subject, and I could keep on doing this forever.
What do you think it is that brings the different characters and personalities to New York?
It's the powerhouse of the nation. New York has always been, not always, but from very early on, it was the largest, busiest, wealthiest, craziest, hardest city in the United States, and it's not the largest anymore, but it's still all those other things. I think New York City has definitely changed a lot since. I think it was the old New York up into maybe the mid 1980s or so. And then it really began shifting to the new New York, which a lot of us who remember the old New York aren't very happy about. But here we are. It's not quite, I don't think it's quite the dynamo it used to be. But for centuries, it was the dynamo. It was the capital of the United States in every way except for politics. Washington, D.C. was the political capital. New York was the financial capital, the shipping capital, the manufacturing capital. We don't think of it as a factory town. We think of places like Detroit or Pittsburgh as factory towns, but it was, in fact, the biggest factory town in America well into the 20th century. It was the media capital, which is not so much anymore, but movies, radio, TV, newspapers, book publishing all happened in New York City and then went out to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And it was what I call a culture engine, especially downtown New York below 14th Street, which is a special interest for me. Because my metaphor for it was that it was a great cultural brain. And it had two hemispheres, like our brains. One was Greenwich Village, and the other was the Lower East Side. And between those two hemispheres, it churned out art and entertainment from the lowest of the low to the highest of the avant-garde high through the 19th and 20th centuries, and for the world. And because of all that, New York was a magnet for people who wanted to be here and be part of that in any way, like as they wanted to be on Wall Street, they wanted to be in Greenwich Village, they wanted to be making movies, they wanted to be whatever, in fashion or in the media. So it was a magnet for people who could make it here. There's all that stuff about how if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. It's a cliche, but like a lot of cliches, there's a lot of truth in it. If you could come here and put up with all the things you have to put up with to be here, it was a place of liberation, I think, for a lot of people in a whole lot of ways, where they could express themselves, be themselves, make something of themselves.
What you mentioned earlier that sometime in the 80s, things seem to have shifted from old New York to new New York kind of thing. What was the catalyst behind that shift, and what are the things you've seen changing?
As most of the stories you can tell about New York City, it comes down to three things: the price of real estate, the price of real estate, and the price of real estate. And it had always, it's always been a very expensive place to be since way back. But it got more and more and more. It accelerated tremendously in the 80s, certainly in the 90s, and then in this century, the 21st century, it has just soared, skyrocketed. All these gigantic buildings going up. One of the impacts of that is that it really has lost a lot of its old character. Every city, every town, every locality in the world, I would say, has its own personality. New York had its very different personality from Baltimore, where I'm from, or from L.A., which is another giant city, but a very different giant city, or Dallas-Fort Worth, which is completely different from any of those others. They all have their own character and personality. You can mess with that and change it if all you're looking to do is make money on it and have an economic impact in it, which unfortunately a lot of those kind of people have always been attracted to New York too. There's a lot of, I won't mention a certain person's name, but a certain person who's done very well for himself since he was a real estate hustler in New York City back in the 80s and 90s. they tend to, if you're only in it for the money, if you're only building to make money on it, it's going to have probably a deleterious effect on the character and the personality of the city. And I think that's definitely happened in New York City. It's not the New York, even the New York I moved to in 1990. So just in that amount of time, 30 whatever years, it's lost some of its old, the neighborhoods aren't quite neighborhoods anymore, a lot of them. The Greenwich Village it looks like Greenwich Village still, of course, because you can't knock all that down or you wouldn't have Greenwich Village. But the spirit of it is not there anymore. A lot of, once again, I'm mostly I have a lot of interest in downtown New York below 14th Street. And all of that is completely changed just in my time in New York City.
But they also seem to be the last bastions. I
They're
walk
hanging
around
in
New
there.
York all the time.
And the Upper West Side a little is hanging in there a little, but
way Upper West Side.
Yeah,
You got to
yeah.
get more towards Harlem.
Well, but even Harlem now.
Morningside Heights kind of thing to
Yeah.
get some of that vibe. But
not much, right?
No.
No, and it's and I do think that's almost entirely because of the power of real estate development in Manhattan and bleeding out into Brooklyn, and at some point it'll bleed out into Queens and the Bronx, and probably never Staten Island, but I don't think. So there's been one of the major effects that it's had, especially downtown, that there since the 80s, there's been a great diaspora of the kinds of creative types, artists, writers, intellectuals, political radicals, feminists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, gays, lesbians, et cetera, who used to all be attracted to downtown Manhattan and came here and created that cultural brain that I'm talking about. And we're churning out tremendous amounts of culture for the world. And the whole world sent its creative people here to be a part of that. In the 20th century, nobody who was anybody in the arts in the world did not at least pass through downtown Manhattan, and many came and stayed. They're not going to do that now. It used to be a magnet for misfits and mystics and visionaries, and now it's a magnet for millionaires.
yeah.
Fine, okay, but that's a different city than it was even when I first got here in 1990.
In a really big way. It's where, I have two kids, one's 21 and one's 24. And, the 21-year-old is skateboarder and very attracted to the gritty underground of New York.
Good.
The kids who are putting that graffiti on your building that you're really pissed off about. But, it's like he reminds me of, when I moved to New York, you wanted that edge. You wanted that creativity.
Yes.
You wanted to be around the writer who was working on their book, the artist who was, trying to, sell their art, the musician that was playing some kind of punk and they could play 3 chords, but boy, it sounded good and you banged your head to it.
Good 3 chords.
Yeah. The dressing, what everyone would wear, who came up with the best thrift shop outfit. I loved it. I still do.
Well, and that's encouraging to me that he's into that. One of the things is that if you look at the history of New York City, people have been counting it out and just saying, no, it's over, it's done, for a couple centuries now. The Greenwich Village was supposedly done by 1920. No artist would ever move there again. And that's not true. There was several more generations. Now it does appear to be done, but
I think they've shifted to the East Village and the Lower East Side.
Not even the Lower East Side anymore. Everybody I used to know, I used to live on the Lower East Side. I don't know. I know one guy who's still there. Everybody else has left. They're in Brooklyn. The part of the diaspora has been that they forced the artists and the thing about artists in America that has always been a truism is that it's a terrible way to make money, being arty in any sense, a writer, a poet, a dancer, a musician, whatever. It's a terrible way to make money. Some few do, but most don't. So they're always looking for, they need to find cheap places to live and work. They have to have those. Greenwich Village was that for a long time. It's not that anymore. The East Village and Lower East Side was that for a long time. It's not that anymore. It's more expensive there now than on the Upper East Side, the traditionally expensive places to be. So where do they go? They go out to Brooklyn, which was cheaper for a while. But now Brooklyn gets more and more. I was talking to a young man not that long ago who told me that he can't afford to be in Bushwick anymore, and he's going to move to East New York. So at some point they're going to push them out to Coney Island and then push them out into the Atlantic Ocean. And doing the pushing is always the price of real estate, the price of real estate, the price of real estate. That's what changes everything in this city, I think.
When you look back on the history of New York and the people of New York throughout the history of New York, do you have a favorite collective time period or era of people and creativity?
There are a couple that I do like, and they're both in Greenwich Village. I really like Greenwich Village in the 19-teens, the years leading up to our getting involved in World War I, which changed everything. But it was not the first bohemian scene in the village. There'd been one. The first bohemian scene in America was in the village in the 1850s.
How do you define a bohemian scene?
They defined themselves. They called themselves bohemians. The idea of Bohemia had come out of Paris and then London, and it first started hitting New York in the mid 1850s, and this group of frayed collar writers and journalists and actresses and actors. There was one great actress. Her name was Jane McElhenney, but she was from North Carolina. She's a great example of somebody who did not fit where she was in North Carolina and made a beeline for New York City and knew to come, even at that point in the 1850s, she knew that she wanted to be in Greenwich Village. Which most people weren't even calling Greenwich Village at that time. It was the 9th Ward. But she knew she wanted to be there. And she came up here, and her stage name was Ada Claire. Ada Claire. I'm sure that's why she called herself that.
That's a good one.
I know that. I've never read anybody, but she had to.
I'm jealous I didn't think that up.
It's a really good, isn't it? See, so
really
right
good.
There. And that was and they were calling themselves bohemians. And the New York Times was already writing about, those layabouts, those lazy, they were writing about them the same way 100 years later. 100 years later, they'd be writing about beatniks. All they do is hang around in cafes and they don't work and they, it's...
I don't know, they said that about Picasso too.
Well, see, exactly. But you didn't see them getting a whole lot of work done. They were getting a whole lot of work done. What you saw as a hipster tourist coming to Greenwich Village was them hanging around in their cafes and their trattorias and eating spaghetti, which was an exotic dish in the 19-teens. People were watching them eat spaghetti. There was P.G. Woodhouse wrote a song about it in a Broadway musical about we go to we wear our artist smocks and we even eat spaghetti. So, and that's in the 19-teens, and that's the period that I think would be really cool to have been here. It's the second wave of bohemianism it's when people start calling Greenwich Village the left bank of America. It was packed with writers and artists, and Margaret Sanger was there with the Planned Parenthood and socialists and communists and anarchists, and it was just popping all the time, and they were all bouncing off one another, and I think inspiring one another to do great stuff. The war changed all that. Getting involved in the war changed that in a lot of ways, and it kind of died down for a while. The other period is after World War II, late 40s through the 50s. Downtown New York was booming. Literally everybody who was anybody doing anything avant-garde-ish in any of the art forms was in downtown New York doing it. And they were doing it together. There was a lot of collaborating going on. I think it would have been a really exciting time and fun time to have been here.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about the different kinds of people. And I moved to the city in 1984.
Yeah.
And I think what made me gravitate towards it was because I felt like I fit here. And
Yeah, yeah.
I did not feel like I fit in high school. I didn't feel like I fit through about 24 anywhere. And my first year in New York, I'm not sure I think I fit here, but I felt like I was welcomed. There were so many just characters, is the only way I can describe it, that were just like, you want to hang out with us? I mean, it was one thing after another that I was just talking with a friend the other day. I remember this guy, Ingo Thuray, who was a top, you might even remember him. He was a big model did a lot of the Marlboro stuff, did a lot of stuff in the 80s, big model. And one night I had just met him, maybe 3 nights before, from Claire O'Connor, who was a big publicist at the time, and she was crazy, and she was involved with Atom Bomb. It was like, just like nutsiness.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm coming to pick you up, and I need you to wear your best black tuxedo jacket.
Ooh.
I'm like, well, I don't have one. So I remember running to the thrift shop to get a tuxedo jacket.
Yeah.
And he shows up dressed like Marilyn Monroe, and we went to Patricia Field's fashion show, which I just saw her she's down in the Lower East Side now. Just opened a store.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it was like so many memories. It was the characters. And there was community within those characters. Nobody cared what anybody else was doing. You know, you want to go dress up like a woman? Who cares?
Right.
You know, it was all part of the entertainment and brought the creative juices, I think, out of everyone. What's happening with that? Where are those shifts going on?
I hope that some of that is still happening out in Brooklyn, because there are a lot of young people and a lot of artists and creative people out in Brooklyn.
And I do think it's happening here in New York. It's like through the eyes of our children, I can see they're
Good.
That's
encouraging to me, because I don't see a lot. I still have friends here, but of course most of my friends are old timers like me. So, and they're still here, and they're still making things happen, and I'm still here, and I'm still trying to make things happen. But it doesn't feel the way. I mean, you're talking about how you didn't feel like you fit in anywhere until you came here. That's the theme of my book about the village. The village was like a magnet for misfits.
Why do you think that is?
Because at that time, it's hard to remember now, but up until, let's say, the 1970, but into the 60s anyway, there were not nodes of hipness and counterculture and the underground spread out all around the United States or around the world the way they are now. Like every town with a college in it has some hipsters and some culture going on in it. It was not that way in, say, the 1940s, the 1950s, even into the 60s. If you were an artist or an arty type of any sort, if you were gay, if you were lesbian, if you wanted to dress up as a woman and you were a man, if you were a dancer, a poet, a political radical, you were pretty much a lonely misfit, an outsider, everywhere you lived around the United States of America, except you heard about this one tiny little piece of real estate in Lower Manhattan called Greenwich Village, where it seemed that if you went there, you would be welcomed and you'd find a whole lot of other arty misfits. And it was true. And so it was a great magnet for people when I was doing the book, I interviewed some older arty types who had been in the village for 40, 50, 60 years when I was interviewing them. And they all said to me, I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and I liked putting on my sister's lipstick, and if I had done that out in public, I'd be dead. I wouldn't be talking to you right now. But I heard that there was this place where guys could do that, and nobody would care. And I think that when I talk about how liberating New York was, that's part of what I mean. It was liberating for all kinds of self-expression in a time when self-expression was pretty much repressed and sometimes even oppressed. Pretty much everywhere else around the United States of America. There were little glimmers in Chicago, there was a little scene for a while, a little arty scene, but that died out. San Francisco, a little bit of a scene. LA, a little bit of a scene. But if you were in Houston, Texas, boy, and you wanted to be, a ballet dancer, you moved to New York City as soon as you could.
You mentioned self-expression, and I think self-expression has taken a major hit. And you have observed more about people than a lot of people have because you've observed them over the years. You've studied them over the years to be able to write extremely deeply and articulately about them. What do you think's going on with self-expression? I mean, it used to be like, stick it to the man was like a theme. Now it's, well, we're going to comply with the man. We're in a very much complying state, which, not that I want to start a revolution today or anything, but and I don't even want to lose that word because we could get censored for it. So we're not saying that, but I'm talking about that sense of comply versus be creative and uniqueness. What's going on?
It's a really good question, and I think it's probably more complex than we could answer here. I do think a piece of it is that there used to be a sense that the best thing you could be in America, the best kind of person you could be in America was an individual, a very individual, even though that was very hard to do in a lot of places, in most anywhere. It's not an easy thing to do, but I think there was an ethos in America that was the best way to be, is to be an individual. And I think there's much less of that now. The social norms have moved much farther towards being a piece of a group. I'm a member of a group, and I identify by that group. So identity politics, I think, has had something to do with that. No, you don't want to be an individual. You want to be a this. You want to be a that. You want to wear a label and be that label, and then all of you agree with one another. So there's not going to be a lot of self-expression in that context.
It's interesting you say that because, that individualism, I mean, what I think of when I think of the 1980s, which, the late 70s and early 80s were explosely fun for just playing the character expression. Just look at the bands of the late 70s and 80s, from the Ramones to Blondie to, any of even the heavy metal, the hair bands, the everything. But that individualism of, I'm just going to do this for me, versus now it's almost like it's shifted. I'm going to do it, and you have to approve it.
Well, there's a lot of that too.
Like that's,
and I think that is part of the identity politics. We don't identify as individuals anymore. I think pride politics became a bit of a problem when you weren't proud about anything you had done. You were just proud because you were this or that. You could wear a label that you were proud of being that label. Well, why don't you do something to be proud of, and then I'm with you. But it's not just that. I also do think that the digitalization of our culture, which is raced ahead in ways that even 10 years ago you wouldn't have pictured us being this. It's isolating. And at the same time it removes character. You don't have to have character anymore because you're sitting at home and looking at the screen all the time. Or people walking down. It just knocks me out that to people walking down the street staring at the thing in their hands. I've never been able to bring myself to do that. I don't and maybe it's just because I'm too old to know how to do that.
But think of all the things they're missing. When I see a baby in a stroller, I'm like, all the things that kid could be absorbing around them.
I know. In New York City, of all places, to be walking around like that, I love walking around. In Manhattan, I have from before I moved here. I started coming up here in 1970. And was fascinated by it right away. It's, you could fit Baltimore into one little corner of Brooklyn. I was staying with a friend. We had just graduated from high school, and he came up here to go to Columbia, and he was in Morningside Heights. So I came up to visit him that Christmas time, so Christmas 69, 70. And he said, you got to go out and see Coney Island. And I said, yes, I do. How do I get there? And he said, take the train. And he showed me which. And by the time I got there, I thought, am I in Florida by now? That was the longest subway ride ever. And when it comes up in Brooklyn and you're up above stuff, it's just, and you can say the Baltimore would be like over here in this little corner, before you get to Coney Island. So the just the size and the detail of this city, like if you walk down a block down the street, any street, even with all the new, not very detailed, not very interesting building that has gone on, there's still stuff to see. There's people to see. There's, a rat dragging a pizza thing. I mean, there's always something going on. And to be walking along it like that, I don't understand that. But I do think that's part of what has happened to our culture. We've been digitized.
Yeah.
And that's why I think self-expression is become problematical, if it has. I think that has a lot to do with it, too.
I think I couldn't agree with you more. And like when our kids will express stress growing up in an AI age, or all the digital stuff and everything that's happening and how careers are shifting, I would say just keep thinking entertainment, because eventually, I believe pendulums swing, and obviously in the early 2020s, the crap of, you can't leave the house.
Right. That didn't help.
No. and I think it really has a huge long tail on how people are, because I now know people who just still don't want to go out there for one reason or another. But I really believe eventually that rubber band's got to snap and people are going to say, I got to get out. I got to party, so anyone who can lead that, get that energy going.
Yeah. And it was certainly, it's not that long ago that people were going to raves.
Yeah.
And even that doesn't seem to be happening much anymore. I don't know. Why would I know? I'm 73 years old. But it doesn't seem to be happening as much anymore. I think, I do think that I should have thought that of COVID, because I think.
Well, I think they're happening, but we're just not invited.
Well, why would I be? Why would they ask me to come to a rave? So maybe.
But they're also different.
I don't know. I haven't been to one. But I think you're right about COVID, too. I've thought since then that it was a mistake to quarantine everybody like that for that long. I thought it was going to happen for a couple of weeks, and it would be sort of interesting. It'd be like you were in the Last Man on Earth movie, and then it dragged on and on and on and on and on. And the younger the kids were at that, going through that, I think it has damaged their sociability at any rate, if not other things.
How are you finding, if you were to, chronicle 2025, New York, where would that book start?
Oh, that's a really good idea. I like the idea. I think with the fact that it is the new New York, I think it would start kind of where I ended the Village book, where I was saying, that and that was 10 years ago, I guess, or so, that we were in the new New York by then, 2013, 2012, whenever that book was. And the old New York had definitely passed on. So I think I would start with that. There was a New York City. That's not the New York City there is now. Let's look at what's going on now. And I would have to go out and do a lot more walking around, I think.
Because what I observe is, first of all, businesses are having a tough time getting people back into the office. And even those that are making it a demand that, if you want your job, you have to come. But they're still, you walk on, not too long ago, I was walking on 57th Street, and I lived on 57th and 10th one time, but I was walking down 57th Street, which was always bright. Not as bright as Times Square, but it was bright.
Yeah.
And now it's dark because there's nobody up in those office buildings at night. So you have the shift in the office space. You have, empty office, places that people found out they could work from anywhere. And then
Another COVID thing. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And then every building that's going up, I'm always looking every time I see some construction going up, is this an apartment building or is it a hotel? The amount of hotels that are going up in New York City is unbelievable. My theory is because what's the hotel tax? 18.75. So New York can make money
Right.
on more hotels.
Right.
But how does this end up shifting the landscape? Less people, working in offices, more hotels than ever. I really wonder what that shift's going to be like. And since history kind of repeats itself,
I think
and people stay the same, I want to know your thoughts.
It's a long wave. I mean, people were first noticing that transition, that they were building more and more hotels, fewer and fewer residential spaces in the city. Not the people not coming into the offices part. That's much more, but hotels versus residential goes back to Ed Koch. Ed Koch was encouraging for exactly the reason you say, that there was a nice tax on hotels, and you could make the city could make more money off hotels than it could make off residential. Also, at that point, tourism was really low. Comparatively speaking, it was low in New York City because in the 1980s, the city was dirty and screwy, and you remember how it was. It was dangerous and dark and gritty and drugged out, and tourists weren't flocking here anymore at that point. In the 70s and 80s, it was not the tourism magnet it has become again. And part of that has been because they knocked a lot of that old stuff down. They pushed a lot of those old kinds of people out. They what has gone up is cleaner, neater, more internationalist. It's less and less that weird, dangerous New York City that it was back in the 80s or the 70s. It's more and more. Parts of it look like San Diego on the Hudson. I don't have anything against San Diego, but it's not New York City. And some of it looks like Oshkosh on the East River. It's just amazing how bland a lot of the new real estate impact on the city has been. And that blandizing effect, that's not a right word, but whatever the right word would be.
That's a good word. Blandizing. I like that.
All right. Well, we just made it up then. That doesn't, it bleeds out from the buildings, and it has an impact on the people who are here and on the activities that are here, and it makes it I think it's a less lively, less interesting city than it used to be. It's also cleaner, neater, less dangerous, and all those things, and that's all good. That's all to the good. But you lose some of the old New York City every time you knock down a block of old tenement buildings that people have been in for 150 years and put up another just bland glass and steel high rise. And they've been doing that. That started in the mid 80s, and it slowed down for a while, but it has really accelerated over recent years. Every time you turn around, there's another finger building sticking up out of Midtown Manhattan. You can go too far with that. And I think maybe they are. And it does have an impact.
I want to go back to some New York characters because you've written about so many. Do you have a few favorite New York characters that really stand out in your mind?
I have bunches.
I bet.
I really like Victoria Woodhull. Victoria Woodhull was the first woman in the United States to run for president, like 50 years before women could even vote. She did it in the 1870s. She was also a spiritualist, a sex worker, a con man. She opened the first women-run brokerage on Wall Street. She had the first women-owned and run newspaper in the United States. She was just this fascinating character who's all over the map. And when she ran for president, she was in jail on election day. She had been jailed by the morality police in New York City. Fascinating character, troublesome character. I don't understand why that movie has never been made. There's been some good biographies of her, but she started out in this tiny little muddy, dirty little town somewhere in, I think it was Ohio, somewhere in the Midwest. But she was one of those people, she like kind of made a beeline for New York City, and right after the Civil War, when New York City was roiling and it was full of money and people not knowing where to spend their money. And she said, I'm going there. Because she was a con man, among many other things that she was. So I love Victoria. She's a great character. And there's bunches of those. There's just tons of those kinds of characters in New York that, when it would be difficult to be the historian of a lot of other cities in New York, in the country, the way I can be an historian of New York City, because it's just packed with interesting people like that. And from the 1600s on, there's always been fascinating people doing interesting things, good, bad, and indifferent. Not indifferent, good and bad in New York City, where that's a little harder to say about other places.
If you had a book today and a couple of New York characters you'd focus on, where would you start?
Well, actually, I am getting ready to start on a book, a little one, a slim one, about Marcel Duchamp coming to New York City and his impact on New York City and New York City's impact on him. He's an amazing character. He was turning the New York art scene upside down before he even got here, because that painting is the famous Nude Descending a Staircase, number 2, was here in the 1913 Armory show, the famous Armory show, where modern art came to New York City. And he was part of modern art. But he was, for whatever reason, New Yorkers just keyed on that one painting that they thought was either amazing or stupid or ridiculous. There was a lot of jokes about it. Every newspaper had cartoonists doing parodies of it. And he had no idea any of that was going on. And he wasn't even being an artist at that point. He was working in a library in France. Came to New York like 3 years later, I think, and was amazed to find out that he was this, everybody knew who he was. He was infamous in New York City, and he loved it because he loved being famous or infamous. And then he went on to keep altering New York City's art scene, which in the 20th century meant you were altering the art scene for the world. The whole time he was here, he left, he came back, he left, and then he came here and stayed. And he's a great character, and I'm going to have a lot of fun writing his book.
Oh, that sounds like a good one. How do you decide who you're going to write or what you're going to write, and how do you tie that New York story in there?
It's different every time. I mean, my most recent book is about the Soviet space industry.
Yes.
So, it's a lot of it's just, I'm interested in a lot of things. There are writers who, like, they write the one book and then they spend the rest of their lives talking about that book in one way or another. And that's fine. But I couldn't do that. I'm interested in too much stuff. And if I get to write about one out of 50 things that I'm interested in every now and again, I'm a happy man. So I've always been interested in that. So and I talked the publisher into letting me do that one. So, and that's how it usually happens. I wanted to do my 2 Lobes of Downtown as one giant book, and I got talked out of that. And people were like, "No, that would be a really, really giant book." So I did The Village first, and then later I've done this little one with my pal Clayton Patterson, who still lives on the Lower East Side, about some of the characters that we have written about before. But I would love to do the giant Lower East Side history too. It's a great book waiting for me to write it, frankly.
What's your writing style? Because you are the guy to write that book on the Lower East Side. What's your writing style?
I read. And as I'm doing that, I'm taking notes and I'm writing, and I build it up into a book. Sometimes I know, like with the Soviet book, I knew what that book was about before I even started it, because I had been thinking about it for a long time. But a lot of the others, I have a vague notion of what it's going to be about, but it's as I'm writing it that I figure out what the book is, what it is ultimately going to say about whatever the topic is.
How would you define your writing discipline?
I have none.
Oh, I don't believe it. You can't have this many books, and the stack is actually much higher than this.
It is higher than that.
Much higher than this.
It's like ridiculous.
So You do have a discipline.
Okay.
What is it?
I write every day.
Okay.
I'm not. I don't know that I'm disciplined about it. It's more like I'm driven to do it. I have to do it. I've been writing since I was like 12 years old, and I have to do it. Start to get really crazy if I'm not writing for a couple of days even. So that's really the answer. I'm just blah, 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 blah.
Do you keep a lot of notebooks?
No.
No.
Some notes. But no, I actually went digital. It's all on the computer now. And a lot of the books I read are on the computer now. There's really good digital archives online now, so that you don't have to. When I moved from Brooklyn into Manhattan last year, it's a shame, but I couldn't figure out what else to do with it. My library basically got thrown away.
Oh.
I know. But kind of nobody was interested in taking it. So I said, I had a couple of friends who came and picked what they wanted out of it. But I had thousands of books lying around. My apartment was ridiculous. It looked like a book bomb had gone off in it. And I couldn't see myself not having them around me all the time. But I moved into a much smaller space because I moved to Manhattan. And I just, you know what? They're gone. It's all online. I'll find it again if I need to find it online. I love the internet. I hated the internet for a while. I was an old-fashioned type. But I think the internet's a great thing.
The internet is a great thing, but it's so funny every time we talk about, downsizing. And I have those days when I'm like, I just want to go live in an Airstream.
Yeah.
And the first reaction from my family is, oh, yeah? And are we allowed to come, or is it just you and your books?
Books, yeah.
Because I love books.
I sort of feel liberated from them when I got rid of them. It looked like Fahrenheit 451. The guys were like throwing them out the window, literally throwing them out the window into a bin that they were hauling off somewhere, I guess to the trash. And there were some great books in there, but they're online somewhere. I'll find them if I need them.
Do you wake up in the middle of the night with ideas and have to get up and jot them down?
Yes, all the time, yeah.
And do you actually get up, or do you just keep a little notepad next to you?
No, I get up because I don't have notepads anymore. I have to go over to the computer and do that.
Can you go back to sleep after that, or does it set you on the mode?
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it depends.
When you said you write every day, do you do it as like a discipline where you say, I'm going to write for 15 minutes, or I'm just going...
Nope.
The urge strikes.
Sometimes I get up and I'm almost always sitting there right away, but sometimes it takes a long time to crank myself up. But by the end of the day, I have done something. When I am asked to go talk to writing students, I always say two things. A, have a second career, like be a dental hygienist or something, because being a writer is a ridiculous way to make money in America. But two, if you want to be a writer, write every day. Write every day. Even if you're just writing a letter, even if you're just writing notes. I know writers who write, it's like they're carving it in stone, and they write one word and then they walk away from it and they're unhappy with it and come back 3 days later and write the next word. That's a very bad way to be a writer, I think. And just write. Musicians play every day. Dancers dance every day. Writers should write every day.
How do you define the difference between writing and editing?
Well, that's a good one. I've done both. I've done a lot of both. Not just editing my own stuff, but a lot of... I edited a newspaper for 12 years. It is very different. They're different experiences. I love editing other people's work, especially if they're good writers, because then you don't have to do much. But you get to read their stuff, and in that case, as an editor, you're just kind of an encourager. You're just saying, "Yeah, I love this. This is good. Keep going." It's different. It's lonelier when you're doing the writing. And I don't particularly like being edited. I always think I'm a better editor than whoever my editor is. Almost always. I've had a couple good ones.
I never liked being edited.
No, and nobody does probably, because the editor's job is to tell you, cut that, shut up. No, I don't. That could move better if and you're thinking, shut up.
Yeah. Where do you think literature, writing is going to go in the future. We've only got about 5 minutes left, and I'm looking for your take on the landscape of AI, the hit how it's impacting everything. What do you think is going to be the future of writing? Which, I mean, I'm just going to say, I can't think of who said it. Might have been Peter Thiel said, we need books because books are time-stamped in history.
Yeah,
the internet is not.
Oh,
And that
okay.
scares me
All
when
right.
I think about that. That's probably one of the reasons
Good
I
point.
love books. You
Yeah.
can't change it.
Yeah.
You know, Gone with the Wind was written as Gone with the Wind, and it's going to be Gone with the Wind. Now we've got Snow White that crashed at the box office.
Right.
Somebody's going to rewrite it. So
No, that's
what do
true.
you think?
It's a really good point. And I have dealt some. I have a good friend out in Hollywood, and I've watched him dealing with all that, how that stuff happens out there. And I think it has, as writing became like a wing of the entertainment industry, which also started happening in the 1980s. I don't know if that's coincidental. It has become more and more. It's harder for it to be the art form it was back in the day. For instance, literature in America. American literature it peaked in 1970 something. There hasn't been great new literary writing in America for a long time now. I'm sure people would hate to hear me say that, but I think it's true. So AI, that's not a good thing for writing, obviously. The more that there's an ad, and I almost just out of curiosity responded to it, where they say, having trouble writing that book, just push this button and it'll write it for you. I was saying, no. But they're going to teach it to write pretty good books, I think, at some point. It's certainly the kind of novels that are we used to call airport novels. That they're just the spy did this, the girl fell in love with that. Those kind of books, those kind of novels. AI probably could be writing those kind of. I probably could have been writing those kind of novels 50 years ago. So, but literature, honest to God, writing. I know there are people doing it. I think it's harder and harder and harder for them to get it seen by anyone. It was never that easy. But I think nowadays, where are the venues where they can get their work seen? There are still, I guess, some small literary magazines, online literary magazines. I know some people. But AI is not a good thing, I think, for writing, for creativity in general. Do you want to see a movie that AI generated? No. As a tool, fine. As a tool to help that movie maker make something happen on screen that they couldn't make happen on screen, fine. But then it's just like CGI or something, or the old special effects when you had to build the model of King Kong and move him around one thing at a time. That's all. In that sense, AI is just the newest version of King Kong. But when it's actually creating and nobody's involved in it writing that movie or writing that book, I think that is a problem.
I agree. We need more people like you writing good books, John.
Thank you very much.
You're a spectacular writer.
Oh, thank you.
I really want to thank you for joining me, and I could talk to you for another hour, but we're out of time. So we might have to do this again because we have a lot of your books we could still cover.
Oh, that's true.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Dian Griesel. This has been the Silver Disobedience Perception Dynamics podcast. My guest was John Strausbaugh, and I really recommend you check out his books. Below this podcast, you'll be able to find all links to his Amazon page, to his website. I highly recommend his books. Buy them, share them, subscribe to this podcast, and share it as well. See you soon. Thanks a lot. Thank you, John.
Thank you.